Ladies and gentlemen, direct from the bar.
Hello and welcome to the Just Dino Hour. In this edition, we'll be talking about French Style, Dean Martin's debut studio album from Reprise, the 1970 box office blockbuster Airport, and we'll be considering the legacy of Frank Sinatra's Reprise records. If you haven't already joined our mailing list, the link is in the description below, and you'll receive our digital magazine, Just Dino. It's completely free and always will be, and issue 421 is available right now. With that done, on with the show.
All the music of life seems to be like a bell that keeps ringing for me.
So, the album of the month this month is French Style, and Dean recorded it in February of 1962. And he had just come from his Capitol years, which was about 14 years that he was at Capitol. He had a great run of hits. He had some albums under his belt. And we go to Reprise, to our friend's record label, and we're pretty much not noticed. That, the album was released, I believe, in April of 1962. But prior to that, Italian Love Songs was released, and it spent some time on the chart. And then here comes French Style, and whether it was the marketing, whether it was the timing, the album just did not play out as what I would want as an artist, a recording artist, to do. And then we had another album from Capitol that was released, and I don't think that he was done fairly in the release of this album. But ultimately, I think it's a great album. It's has several different types of songs, and if you go through the list, many of those songs were actually used in plays and in Broadway. The majority of them were in the charts when they were released, and it was just unfortunate that songs like that couldn't make a hit, on the charts. And I don't know if it was discouraging. He was pretty easygoing and just kind of went with the flow, and then followed up.
Yeah, I mean, you
with
kind
Dino.
of had Tick-a-Tay, which was marketed very well as his first Reprise single.
Yes. Now,
And
prior
then-
to the album being released and recorded, he had recorded a series of singles that came out before the album did,
which were promoted.
So he did have that going for him. That's exactly right.
And part of the Reprise promotion was, Are You Ready? And the long held, poorly held, long secret kind of thing of being on Reprise. But you kind of look at the album cover, and it's a typical tongue-in-cheek Dean photo of him with a beret, looking slightly mischievous on the cover with a cigarette holder. And I kind of think perhaps that put people off because people didn't take it seriously. It was if you think about all the album covers before then, they were all quite conservative or a very kind of more studio kind of portrait kind of photos. But you had the first proper designed cover, apart from Swinging Down Yonder, which was of course a drawing, probably the first designed cover. And I think that was probably one of the things that put buyers off.
Well, and I do too, but also he already had the reputation of not taking things seriously.
Yeah.
And so, we have come from Capitol, we are at Reprise. This is our first album cover, and it's this. And, did people even think that it wasn't a serious, it was Dean being funny, as you had mentioned.
Yeah. And this was certainly pre-TV show as well, so it wasn't as if the general public were aware of his general demeanor in kind of his performances. So it is interesting that Reprise never even attempted to market it in a major way when it was a pretty
Yeah,
big signing for them. Probably as big as Sinatra setting the whole project up in the first place.
right. Well, and one thing that I learned through the Reprise article that I wrote was that they were watching as Jimmy Bowen comes in 1963 and saw what he did with Dean. And, Mr. Sinatra is the one that says, "Hey, can you help me?" And I think that they just didn't have the right producer. The timing may not have been right for the release of the album. There were a lot of elements, and honestly, I don't know that they knew what to do with Dean Martin.
But the album itself is great.
And I love it.
Yeah.
We listened to it today when we were in the car, and it's a fun album. And a lot of the songs you listen to him and you just have to see him bebopping around and
Yeah.
and having a great time. But then we turn around and we sing this really serious song, and you can feel the emotion and the interpretation in his voice. And I think that was what was magical about him, is that he loved singing. He'd been doing it from a very young age.
Yeah.
And he probably thought of this as a bump in the road, and we'll get over it, and we'll go through it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it kind of whether he was even conscious of it. I mean, I don't know whether he wasn't certainly fueled by album sales. It wasn't what drove him.
Right.
But I think he was always wanting to be a success in what he was doing with regard to his albums. So it is interesting. I wonder kind of how he felt, what kind of conversation he must have had with Frank at that point, or did they even have those kind of conversations, about why weren't we marketing French style as much as other Sinatra albums at the time, and where was the focus on the marketing team?
Right. It's definitely something that as we look at it now, that you wonder, why didn't we market this man that had had such a successful time on the Capitol label?
And the orchestrations are beautiful.
They're
the stereo
gorgeous.
effect in the orchestrations is just superb. You
Yeah.
can pick out the instruments and hear them coming in from either side.
Mm-hmm.
The tone
Well,
is
and
just
another
beautiful.
thing about the songs that are on this album, and the three of us have talked about this for a couple of years now, is that they weren't songs that were written in 1962. We're talking about songs that were written in 1932 and 1947, and even earlier than that. I don't know the method to the madness of choosing his songs and that he did for whenever. But it is interesting that a lot of the songs, when you start looking at the background, they had background and they had history. And did we select the songs because it was number 9 in 1939, or did we just like the song? I mean, we've heard him say, I was driving around and I was listening to the song and I liked it and I gave it to Mac, and we'd worked on it, or Mac would tell me.
Yeah. But bearing in mind, this is a specifically themed album. You kind of have to obviously wonder that he was obviously following the trend of Cha-Cha D'Amour and Italian love songs. So there was obviously, he had it in, or his producers has something there that wanted to kind of follow that trend. Perhaps they were following that Capitol kind of example,
Exactly.
having the thematic albums.
Because we covered 4 different groups of music.
Yeah,
we had an
Latino comes
Italian,
next after
we had a
this one.
Latin,
Yeah,
we had a French, and then another Latin album, Latin-based album.
and his country albums. So there was
Yes.
definitely the beginning of his Reprise career was almost the tail end of his Capitol recordings with the thematic kind of album.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, with the marketing again, as we said, was non-existent, which is very strange. But you kind of look at those particular songs. I mean, one of mine that I love is "April in Paris." And
Yes.
it's kind of, they're so intrinsically Dean, even though they're meant to be French, French-esque kind of love songs. But you still have that Dean feel to them, and I think that's kind of what makes this album really. Any person could sing a batch of French songs, but to know that he's singing them in 40 Degrees Hollywood while singing about what he was saying in April, and it's just, you just really think, just like his Christmas album, you really believe that he's sitting in a log cabin somewhere with the snow tumbling down as he sings Marshmallow World or something. And it's just the same with this album. You really feel that he's actually there by the River Seine and on a little riverside cafe, and it's just his emotive way that he performs these songs are just incredible. They really are.
Yes, I totally get it and agree.
Some of the best songs he's ever recorded, I think.
Kind of, you know, as you put in your article, you know, an album filled with beautiful love songs and ballads, which was, for whatever reason, overlooked and underrated. And you said as well that his delivery of each of the songs is done in such a way that one would believe that it actually been written specially for him. And I think, yeah, that's absolutely spot on kind of observations, and it really is.
I agree.
Do you think the timing of the LP in terms of the Rat Pack era was starting to wane?
Well, that's a thought.
And Sinatra was very much the artiste and driving everything. And Dino was always slightly
in the shadow.
And the image of Dino being the part of the Rat Pack, second in command, and this album wasn't a swinging album, you know, because This Time I'm Swinging did really well.
Yeah.
And French Dino Italian songs went well. Cha Cha
Pretty
Cha
Baby.
D'Amour didn't sell that well either. That Latin one.
Yeah, that's true.
And then so that Capital one didn't sell well. This one didn't sell well. You know, so there's that kind of all that stuff in the background. I don't know. And at this point, he was making kind of light films, wasn't he? Sort of like Who's Got the Action and those kind of things.
He's Sleeping in My Bed. Yeah.
And so there was no serious Dean at this point.
Well, he was all over the page. You know, we did movies, we did Rat Pack, we did The Sands, we did, you know, we had our recording career going on. I think he was stretched, and maybe he himself didn't put forth, you know, what's going on with my album, what's going on with, you know, the promotion of my album.
Yeah.
You
There's
know,
no
so I think there's so many variables.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as well. Kind of, that's a kind of a good point you kind of both make there about those different facets of him, and you kind of think about, you know, the Rat Pack shows he did, the Sands. You wouldn't, that kind of performance, that kind of that Dean Martin on the stage with Frank and Sammy isn't the Dean you see in Who's Got the Action, isn't the Dean you hear on French Style.
No.
And it's quite kind of thinking about it now, actually, it's quite remarkable how different aspects of his career, well, as you say, were all there all at once. So it's like, well, what is he? Is he a master of all? And what's that phrase? A jack of all trades, master of none.
Master of none. Yeah.
Then he was a master of what he did, and I think that was probably because he was inconsistent, perhaps.
That's a good point.
With his presentation.
Because they're all running parallel.
Yeah.
It's hard for the psyche of the public to work out what we got here.
Who is Dean?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's probably what Reprise was thinking. What is going on?
You
know, where is his focus? You know, at this time. And again, we don't know that. We didn't sit down and ask him that. You know, we're speculating a lot of what happened and what went wrong and what could have been done differently.
I mean, if you think
also,
sorry, go on.
I think also that the songs that he sang at the Sands, if you look at his Sands shows or the songs that he sang with the Rat Pack, they were not album songs necessarily. No. You know, he wouldn't be singing a lot of what is on French Style in a Rat Pack show, and he's, you know, he might sing, well, he did sing some of them at the Sands, you know, from this album, but it wasn't a show. It wasn't picks for a show.
Yeah.
You know, this is, I think that we had that going on as well. So,
I was just going to say, think about those singles that were prior to this and at the same time. You know, Tick-a-tee, Tick-a-tay. Senza Fine, which is probably one of the most beautiful singles he's
Oh,
ever
it's
done,
gorgeous.
and Who's Got the Action,
Yeah.
and it all at the same time. It's like, hang on a minute, they're so diverse.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the one that is classically produced, like Senza Fine, is a work of art, and it just goes nowhere. It's just, left.
Or Mamselle, it's just.
Yeah, or Mamselle. Well, Mamselle, any of these really deep, meaningful ones from this album, they go nowhere. And that, I find that fascinating.
Yeah. But he's renowned to be a exceptional kind of balladeer, exceptional singer of love songs, and French Style should be the ultimate romantic album. But I think as well, you kind of listen to that, and there are moments again of Dean being tongue in cheek.
Oh yeah,
and I
Bon
think,
and Poor People of Paris.
Yeah,
Gigi.
exactly. Yeah,
Mimi.
and with that kind of
Mimi.
that wonderful kind of taxi cab sound effect with the horns, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just all those kind of little kind of Dean touches that obviously that were kind of there at because his producers kind of knew what he wanted or what he was like, but you wouldn't get that on his stage show. But then he did say, I mean, later in later years, if you want to listen to my songs, go buy my albums. If you want to watch me sing them, come and see me on stage. So he was very aware and very conscious and very self-promoting of, this is me as an album singer, this is me as a live performer. Like it or don't. And I suppose French Style itself as an album, or the songs on that album, probably don't transpose well to a live setting, because they are so unique for the album themselves.
I agree. So Ron, if on this album, what would be your number one song?
Oh.
We didn't come prepared.
You asked for the notes.
yeah, I did come prepared.
Would you like a cue card?
I'm reading it upside down.
Okay.
You've got the Australian
whatever
version.
it takes.
Depending again, this is also the diversity of where Dean can appeal. Depending on your mood, you have a favorite.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And so C'est Bon is like, I love that song. If it's one of the classical ones from it, probably Mamselle or C'est Magnifique.
Oh yeah.
But probably Mamselle.
Yeah.
I think that is, there's so much depth, in that, or La Vie en Rose, Darling J'aime beaucoup.
Oh, that's my favorite one. That one
just
gets repeat.
Yeah, those are classically deep, and the orchestration on those is just phenomenal, I think.
Yeah.
But Mamselle, I find myself listening to quite a lot.
Elliot, what about you?
Well, I said before, April in Paris always kind of makes me smile, and I just love the kind of the way it just kind of sweeps along, and the arrangement is just so wonderful. But my favorite is Mamselle. I just love the kind of the old romantic in me. I think kind of loves the idea of kind of the Paris cafes, and having a son who's half French. I'm aware of kind of being in Paris and kind of how that kind of was, and the whole romantic ideal of Paris, I think, was wonderful. And that kind of what appeals to me. And in fact, as well, I'm going to bit of self-publication here, but I wrote a novel, and a scene in that novel was inspired by Mamselle, of a man meeting a lady in a Parisian cafe in the First World War, so nothing to do with the song particularly, but it was that kind of idea of that kind of roadside cafe that really, really kind of appealed to me, and that for me, that song just kind of stands head and shoulders on the whole album, because it's just romantic. What about you, Cindy?
Mine is Darling. I can't say the rest of the words.
Darling, je vous aime
Darling,
beaucoup,
je vous aime beaucoup.
Yeah. Our French followers are going to be going, oh my goodness, oh, sacre bleu.
I warned you. but I just think it's a very beautiful love. It's one of those comforting songs that you can put on repeat and just, I put grandchildren to sleep with it, and when they go to bed at night, it's just one of those comforting, beautiful love
Something that I
songs.
picked up on a few weeks ago, listening to this, or a few months ago, in C'est Magnifique, it's how he pronounces it. He pronounces it C'est Magnifique, not C'est Magnifique.
Yeah.
It misses the G out, and then I did a little, comparison of other people singing it, and some other people sing it without the C'est Magnifique, and other people sing it C'est Magnifique, pronouncing the G as hard, and he drops it. If you listen to it, he doesn't pronounce it how it's written. And I just wondered what that was about. It made me wonder.
Perhaps it was easier for him to sing it that way.
Yeah. But then the purist would go nuts, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Utterly nuts.
Yeah. But then perhaps those who sang it his way, Dean's way, were singing because they were utilizing Dean's version.
They very well could be.
Yeah.
Something to go off and research.
Yeah. That's your next project, Cindy.
Okay. Because I have
Dean's pronunciations.
Well,
a 16-page article. So we were kind of talking about our movie moments for this edition, and I kind of chose Airport for you, Thomas, because you mentioned in conversation that you hadn't actually seen it, and I thought, here's a good ploy then to get something going. And I kind of thought it would be interesting for you to kind of review it, bearing in mind you hadn't seen it before, and it would be literally a kind of a first taster. So what did you think was your initial reaction?
Well, I mean, firstly, just to address before I get slaughtered, it was just one of those movies that, like all of them, I watched them all back, and it was just one that always seemed to slip through the net. And yeah, when you kind of mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah, wait, have I seen it? And then we kind of were there when I realized that no, I hadn't seen it, and I was mortified.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, especially as someone who kind of really loves, flying and things like that, I do it in my spec. Like I have my flight sim and things like that. It seemed like a no-brainer for me.
Oh, the irony!
I have to watch it. And I mean, my kind of first thoughts were, I mean, I really enjoyed it, and you can see why it started the trend of the kind of disaster movie, that boom in the 70s of disaster movies.
Yeah.
You can really see how it got it. And also just some other things that, I kind of put in my article as well about just the differences from planes then and now, and what you can do. People sitting in the cabin smoking.
Yeah.
The pilot, the pilot played by Barry Nelson, he sits back and he lights up a pipe. He just has a pipe, a tobacco pipe, and you're like, what a wild, you never get that now.
No, it does seem
they're having a cigarette.
Yeah, like a whole world away, doesn't it? I mean, I remember as a kid kind of going up the top deck of obviously we're in England here, a double-decker bus in London, and you could smoke upstairs, and you could smoke on a train, you could smoke on a plane. I mean, last time I think the first time I got on a plane to Tenerife, I think there were people smoking. It was just, but now you just don't think about it. And looking at it on screen, you think it's just so natural, and they look all so laid back, and nobody's bothered about it.
No, everyone was smoking. You pretty much see everyone in there. I noticed like that women don't really smoke in the kind of films, but pretty much every man does. Like I think every man, sits back, even if they're in a doctor's office. The doctor will sit back and be like, "Well, I'm afraid," and you're like, "What?"
Yeah.
So,
well, I suppose it was the whole thing, wasn't it? Even with Dean, he smoked Chesterfields for a while, and the tag in between some of his early kind of non-NBC shows was Chesterfield. It's Dean's cigarette, and it was you want to buy a Chesterfield because you want to smoke like Dean, and you just can't comprehend now how that would even Marlboro on the side of racing cars. That's gone,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we digress. I thought you were digressing. I'm digressing here. Yeah, so a kind of, apart from the kind of the 70s aesthetic of that, which you mentioned it in your article, which was kind of a great kind of point to bring up, but from a contemporary kind of viewing of it, did you find the story to transpose to a modern audience, or did you find it was a dated story?
No, I think so. And I think that one of the things that really stood out, I mean, obviously, spoiler alerts, everyone. So if you haven't seen it, you know, go away, watch, and come back. But, you know, things like where you have, you know, Dio Guerrero, who, you know, kind of blows himself up in the plane.
Yeah.
Genuinely, I didn't think he was going to blow himself up. I was 100% sure. I was like, Dean's going to go out there, smooth talk, everything will be nice. There might be a bit of a shaky moment, but he'll sort it out. He'll calm him down. He'll go back to his wife, and something will happen, and they come into money.
Yeah.
You know, that I feel like a lot of Hollywood endings would have it like that, where there's this kind of. But obviously, I wasn't. I was thinking that's the disaster.
Yeah,
that's the disaster. But then you kind of go, there's a lot long left of the movie, so
yeah.
What are we going to do from here? Is it just going to be a nice flight down? But it just didn't occur to me. And so, yeah, you know, when kind of Dean, you know, walks down and, you know, is trying to calm Guerrero down, and then, you know, he kind of goes, oh, okay, hand me the case, and he's handing him the case, and then boom, out the toilet that guy comes, and then he runs in and blows up half the plane. You go, I was just like, oh my word, didn't see it coming, you know. And then obviously, yeah, I think that for me, I feel like that was one of the main things that was kind of very standout different to a lot of Hollywood movies now, where it's a little bit obviously there's tragedies in movies and things like that, but I feel with those kind of things, maybe they're not so I wouldn't say that they would do it now. They just kind of have this nice unfurling of him reinventing. Because I also felt very bad for his wife in the end. That's all I thought about. I was like, this poor guy, he's not like a terrorist. He's not gone out to, you know, blow things up for the heck of it or for whatever. He just kind of wanted to make some money for his wife by having a life insurance. So he kind of dies. She doesn't get a life insurance payout. She loses her husband. Yeah. And you kind of just go, oh, bloody hell. And you don't see her again.
No, it is a very odd that her character disappears almost from that moment onwards. And I suppose
like,
really
at the end of it, the main kind of part comes about landing the plane.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose you kind of obviously got the core cast of Dean and Bert and Jacqueline Bisset. And I suppose it's those kind of interplays as well with their characterization and their relationships, I suppose, was kind of what drove the film. Yeah. And I suppose really kind of for when you kind of look at Dean in the film, and there's one you said in your article about, you know, he looks immaculate in his pilot's uniform. And what I watched it as well to prepare for today, and I just forgotten how much he put humor into his role, like he does in most things. And this is kind of a deadly serious film. His most serious film for a long time. But he was still there, kind of being quite cheeky to Jacqueline Bisset and being, you know, tongue in cheek and double entendre kind of thing in her kitchen. And I just thought this is just Dino coming through. This is Dino from the TV shows coming through to the film. And I don't think it took me out of the film at all. I was quite readily able to accept that this was Vernon Demarest and that's who he was. He just happened to look and sound and speak like Dean.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it was like a good. I didn't feel like a lot that I was, you know, always conscious of it being Dean Martin.
Yeah.
I think once you kind of get into it and it really starts unfolding, you kind of go, oh, well, how are they going to do this? What are they going to do? And it does kind of really build up the tension in terms of, you know, they're trying to get the other plane off the runway. They still need to clear the runway. How the hell are they going to even land this thing? You know, they don't even know if they're going to be able to land it. So for me, it kind of, although at the beginning I was very aware of it being Dean, because I was like, there's Dean Martin. He's a pilot. This is great. And then afterwards, I just kind of got engrossed into the film. I really enjoyed it. And the other thing was just everyone was having an affair, which is another
Yeah.
kind of like wild part of the movie. You kind of go, all right, Dean, you know, when I think his wife makes a quip about, she says, "Oh, buy me some gloves," and then he goes, "Oh yeah, it's like a 7.5," and she's like, "No, I'm a 5.5. That's the other one."
Yeah.
And you
And
kind of go, "Oh." And
Yeah,
then, you know,
it's
it's kind of like that old school woman of being like, "I know what you're up to, but keep it away from me and don't
because
let
you're a
me."
rich pilot. Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
a bit like, I was like, "Oh, that's just again like such a kind of a very standout thing in the film, which
Yeah.
maybe people back in the days wouldn't have been too. They would have been, yeah, it's fine. It's just kind of
Yeah,
being
exactly. And I think and yes, of course, it dates the film. Obviously, the look of it dates the film, of course. But those kind of subplots, you think you just wouldn't write it now. I mean, the book by Arthur Haley is a kind of a doorstop of a book kind of thing, and it really goes into those relationships even further than the film ever could have done. But I think it kind of drives the story along without making it cliched by, yes, okay, you know, everybody's having affairs, and you kind of think Bert's not happy with his marriage, and then originally having an affair with his secretary and his PA, anything, or the Geneseo character, and you think, well, yeah, okay, there's lots of undertones here, but I think it doesn't detract from the film, and it doesn't detract from the plot that we're looking at this airline disaster. And as you say, it set the precedent for lots of other films after. And there was Airport 75 and Airport Concorde and Airport 79 and 77 and you know, and of course Airplane, which kind of, and I kind of think as well, that's the one thing I think when I watched it that I couldn't help but think of Airplane.
Same. Unfortunately, same. I expected someone to walk in and say, "I just want to wish you all good luck. We're all counting on you."
Yeah.
And then back out.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole thing at the beginning where they're talking about, you know, on the red zone and the yellow zone, no parking in the yellow zone, no parking in the red zone, and then Bert's in the foyer or going out to the runways, and he's got a message on the red phone. I think that's just, they've just lifted that straight from there into Airplane. And I suppose for me, that kind of, I did keep smiling at those points because you just can't not shake that iconic comedy film. But bearing in mind, Airport came way before that, was a good 10 years, isn't it? I think, yeah. And I think to me that shows how popular that film and how good that film is for want to homage that kind of almost 10 years later.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, you know, it grossed over 128 million at the box office, which is nuts.
Yeah,
whereas
it is.
$10 million budget.
Yeah,
that's a lot of pasta to bring back. So
absolutely,
I mean, this kind of shows you, like, for all those kind of, you know, weird intricacies that we find strange now, you know, just made, you know, and we have lots of disaster movies now, and you know, Hollywood is very full of, like, it has to be drama, it has to be this kind of wild madness.
Gerard Butler usually involved,
but you can see, like, where it started, because, you know, I really enjoy watching movies back from the 50s, and they're you know, a lot slower pace. And I recently watched I've just forgotten what it's called, Through the Window with Jimmy Stewart.
Rear Window,
yes. Rear Window. I watched that a few weeks ago, and it's so particularly placed and slow, and you know, it's got these very kind of calm movements to it, even though it's lots of drama. There's not quick cuts everywhere. And I actually really enjoyed the fact that Airport had that drama again, without lots of the kind of handheld madness that you kind of get on now. You think if you watch Snakes on a Plane or something like that, you know, where there's chaos on a plane, there's not a lot of space to move on a plane, but they can't have this very wild camera move. And, you know, sometimes I like to step back and just go, okay, well, if I was really sitting there or really a fly on the wall, I wouldn't have that POV, really. It would be a little bit more calmer. And, you know, because even when they're in the kind of height of chaos, they're still sat in the cockpit flying the plane, you know, and trying to get it. It's not absolute madness the whole time. So I kind of enjoy that style of cinematography more.
And as well, I suppose it could have been very melodramatic, but it wasn't. I think because of that, because of the slower editing, the slower pace.
was the thing that I think was bringing you in, not so much the kind of, oh, how wild can we make it, or do we have to have loads of things happening at once? It was, and it kind of played out nicely. And I felt like the first half of the movie, you really follow Mel Bakersfield. You kind of follow his story more.
Yeah.
And you see little snippets of Dean, but you really, in the first hour or hour and 10, you see very, very little of Dean.
Yeah.
Really, if you kind of think, and then you're all on Mel Bakersfield. You're about kind of his wife being a bit of a nightmare to him, and he's lost his patience with her, and he's got his mistress now. And then, you kind of really focus on what he's going through, and they introduce Dean. And then the latter part of it, you kind of see less Mel, and you get more of the Dean side of the movie. And, it's all about what the pilot's going to do and how he's going to deal with it. And I think that it kind of felt like a nice kind of story-driven. You could follow it very easily with what was happening. It wasn't jumping between the different people and kind of going, wait, was he having an affair, or what was going on?
Yeah, it was a good balance. Yeah, good balance. As you say, you kind of had the kind of the on the ground kind of heavy plot line that then switched over to being in the air. But at the same time, you didn't suddenly detract from what was still happening for the ground crew and their story. Yeah. And I kind of liked that, because you didn't feel cheated. Maybe apart from, of course, what we were saying about the bomber's wife and Thorpe's bomber's widow, she kind of disappeared almost straight away when he'd gone. But I think ultimately you weren't cheated in those plot lines of the main cast, and what they were doing kind of made sense. And the accent with Jacqueline Bissett's character, and I'd forgotten that how kind of quite badly wounded she was. Again, spoilers, we haven't seen it, but you kind of think, how is that going to play out? Is she going to survive? And you think, well, we've had one death. Are they going to make another one happen at the same time? But what I found tragic was when they came out off the plane at the airport, and Vernon was focused on her. And he completely bypassed his wife, who was just desperate to see him. And I thought that was the saddest moment of all, to be honest.
But again, it's another one of those kind of things where you think that kind of, Captain Demarest would kind of go, oh, you know what? We almost died. And, I realize what I'm doing to my wife isn't fair, and kind of have this, change of heart almost.
Epiphany kind of thing, yeah.
When they come back out, he kind of, he makes sure she's okay, but then he kind of goes back to his wife and kind of goes, I'm sorry for what I've done, and but again, you just kind of go, oh, that she's been quite
there,
like philandering, but you just go, he just goes right past her, and you're like, oh, this is it's a bit hard.
Airport, the year's most widely read novel, becomes today's most exciting, most timely motion picture. Airport, big scale in every way, has the biggest all-star cast ever assembled for a single universal motion picture. Burt Lancaster, Dean Martin, Gene Seberg, Jacqueline Bisset, George Kennedy, Helen Hayes, Van Heflin, Maureen Stapleton, Barry Nelson, Lloyd Nolan, Donna Winter.
The pilot from your Flight 45 made a shortcut across the field. And he didn't make it.
Well, what are you doing about it?
Well, when the snow melts in April, we'll get it out. What the hell do you think I'm doing about it?
Outselling any novel of recent years, translated into 14 languages, Arthur Haley's Airport was written for the screen and directed by Academy Award winner George Seaton. It has 7 stories tied into one. Dean Martin is pilot Vernon Demarest, loved by stewardess Jacqueline Bisset, and by his wife, Barbara Hale.
You're sure?
Do you mean, am I sure I'm pregnant? Or am I sure you're the father?
Burt Lancaster is airport manager Mel Bakersfield, at the crisis stage with his socialite wife, Donna Winter.
A week ago, I didn't know we'd have the worst storm in 6 years.
You've always got some damn excuse.
Gene Seberg is Tanya, his devoted assistant.
I'll miss you.
Will you? Enough not to let me go?
The First Lady of the American stage, Helen Hayes, plays the mind-boggling, huggable, perpetual stowaway, Ada Quonset.
Oh, my dear, I couldn't possibly afford a ticket.
Van Heflin gives a superb performance as the desperate Guerrero, matched by Maureen Stapleton as his wife.
Stop dreaming. Just hold on to the job.
I'll do it right this time. I won't mess it up.
And lusty, gutsy Petroni has to be Academy Award winner George Kennedy.
I'll have this mother out of here by midnight.
Is there any chance that the plane would stand the explosion?
Oh, she might still fly. But the sudden decompression at 30,000 feet is something you gotta see to believe.
Now sit down and be quiet.
Oh, you hurt me. You hurt me.
Stop it. You're hysterical.
Oh, help me. Please, help me. Help me.
No! Let go! Personal property, you've got no right to take it over. Here.
Stop!
No! You stay where you are!
Guerrero, listen to me. You'll kill yourself for nothing if you explode that bomb.
For crisis authenticity, Airport has no equal. For mounting tension, Airport has no equal.
Decompression making emergency descent.
For sheer fingernail-biting suspense, Airport has no equal.
You are leaving my area. Contact Cleveland Center 117.5. Good luck.
Airport.
We're gonna crash. We're gonna be killed. I know we're all gonna be...
The kind of Frank's kind of then trigger to kind of set up his own company, I think must have been quite a brave thing to have done in that time.
Definitely, because it hadn't been done before in that time by like a recording artist like him, like someone who was saying, right, I'm going to start my own recording label and I'm going to record on it and I'm going to pretty much steal all of my friends from the competing labels to my own label, like Dean, saying, hey, come over to my, label and I'll pretty much let you do whatever you want. And when you think about Sinatra and everything that we've heard about him, you could see how artists would have more freedom with him. Yeah. Because he understood music and understood what it was like to be constrained and put in a box by a record label. Yeah. And I suppose kind of as a result of that freedom that he gave his peers and himself was pretty kind of radical at the time. And I kind of wonder, kind of, obviously we've kind of heard about, I think you alluded to as well, that Capitol kind of tried to put kind of dampers on it and releasing kind of albums at the same time and kind of trying to overpower kind of the Reprise kind of marketing kind of drive. And I suppose, and you've said as well that, Reprise was a name chosen by Sinatra to symbolize the records he would produce would be played over and over again. Yeah. And they did have initial difficulty getting off the ground, and kind of jumping it forward a little bit, which was something we kind of spoken about with French Style, which kind of links nice actually to what Cindy and Ron and myself spoke about earlier, was that how French Style wasn't marketed. And I kind of think that was kind of, we were kind of debating kind of whose fault that was and where did where the fault lay with that. But I think ultimately kind of Frank kind of exploiting his ability his power that he had at Capitol to then be able to step away and people follow him. We know his reputation, or we hear about his reputation of what person he was, what kind of businessman he was, and you could never say no to Frank kind of thing. And I think, was that in kind of what you kind of found out, do you think that's the case, or was he simply respected and trusted in the industry that people would follow him? I think in this case particularly, I think it would be wrong to not follow him because he was so successful and was one of the greatest voices of that time, along with Bing Crosby, Dean Martin, everyone else that you think of from that cohort, that kind of generation. But I don't see why someone like Dean or other artists wouldn't follow to Frank's label when you know that at some point it probably will be successful because he is a successful artist, and maybe temporarily at that time with Capitol and everything that was going on, maybe they weren't making as much money, but eventually people were going to start buying from Reprise. It was just a matter of time when the dust had settled between the two competitors.
Yeah.
No, I think it would have been a great move for any musician at that point to do something like that.
Yeah. It's interesting as well, though, that Frank sold it almost straight away, didn't he? To Warner's within 2 years.
Yeah.
I didn't quite realize how quickly that happened. Obviously, I knew it happened, but I didn't kind of realize that how quickly he felt that Reprise wasn't working, and so he wanted that backing from Warner's, but he still had that. He was still savvy enough to have that control.
Right.
So that's a kind of interesting kind of thing that you think he'd kind of invested in this himself, found it wasn't working, and went back to a major label for support.
Right.
I suppose for him, with his ego, which I assume he probably did have one, to put it bluntly, I think he probably struggled with that.
I'm sure he did, yeah.
And obviously would never have gone to Capitol.
Well, and you have to also think, where else would he have gone?
Yeah.
He had already been at Columbia.
Yeah.
Which hadn't really worked out. It worked out at the beginning, and then, he had kind of hit the slump in his career where it wasn't, and then he was with Capitol, and he was very successful, but that bridge was burnt. So he had to figure out, I'm sure he wanted to figure out how Reprise was going to work, and it probably was very hard, but he wanted to do whatever he could to make it happen, because it was his freedom as a musician also on the line. Not only, okay, where else do I go? He wanted it to work. It was a new concept at that time. Very similarly to, I compare it to like what happened with United Artists, the movie company.
Yeah. Wasn't that Charlie Chaplin and
Douglas Fairbanks?
Yeah.
And then maybe Mary Pickford.
Yeah.
But they had started their own film company because they wanted more creative freedom for film. And it was a very similar concept. And it was hard to get going at the beginning, and they needed a lot of investors, and it took a long time. But just that idea hadn't been done in music yet. Everything was very scripted. Everything was do what the studio tells you.
Exactly. Yeah, it was the studio system. I mean, we kind of mentioned United Artists there, but that was, for those who are kind of watching who don't really kind of understand that, there was a studio system up until almost United Artists came along, where a actor was signed to a studio and would only ever be able to work with that one studio, and therefore it limited their creativity. So very much like Frank with having his creativity limited with Capitol, he wanted to kind of break away from that. So yes, that's a good analogy to make. The studio system no longer exists. Obviously actors can kind of sign with whoever they want, just like directors, and I always think I used to kind of find it quite amusing when you kind of look at the relationships that kind of artists have with studios. And obviously Frank, of course, had a relationship with Capitol that didn't work for him. He went to Reprise and became a huge successful for Reprise. And then you look at people like Christopher Nolan, more recently, who struggled with what Warner Brothers were asking him to do for his films, and he broke away from them. And now he's become an Oscar-winning director with Universal. So it's kind of, you kind of think, okay, you kind of, these companies think, what have they done and why have they done it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just like James Bond, we kind of alluded to kind of James Bond earlier with Thomas, with Barry Nelson, but Columbia passed on James Bond, and MGM United Artists got it, and then ironically Sony got back with it in 2006 for the Daniel Craig era. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting how these kind of things kind of go round in circles. But I think kind of you kind of look at the kind of people that Sinatra attracted. You've got Dean, and you've got kind of Sammy and all these kind of big stars that were huge in the time. And he must have had some influence to make people like Dean. And we know Dean was notorious for only do what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
And if he wasn't going to do it, he wasn't going to do it. But for him to be convinced to join Reprise I think, the trust they had in Frank must have been tremendous.
Mhm.
But that said, I think Dean was very attracted to it because of that freedom, and he could own
Yeah.
the masters, and he didn't have to go to the studio.
Yeah.
He could
He
do
did
when
whatever
he
he
wanted to do it.
wanted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
And I suppose from that point of view, that probably worked for Dean. Out of all of them, he was
Mhm.
probably one that benefited out of
It's
any of them.
friends with the boss. Come
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
No, but if you look at Dean's discography with Capitol and then you look at it with Reprise, it's so different. Because with Capitol, it's a lot of the same with like the Italian novelty songs or things that you've heard maybe with the Martin and Lewis stuff that's kind of been resung. And in Reprise, you had just so many different variations, and he had his greatest hit on Reprise.
Mm.
So it's just an interesting kind of, it was obviously career-wise, it was obviously the right move for him.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I just think, and it kind of tapped into his ability to step back and let other people take it for him, and he could trust those around him. People like Jimmy Bowen and Ernie Freeman. He could trust their arrangements and trust what they wanted to do, and not worry about the weight of the studio breathing down on him to get into the recording studio and to get these songs recorded, because a lot of contracts even today, you have to record a certain number of songs by a certain number of dates, otherwise the contract kind of expires and so on. But with the Reprise, yes, there was a natural end to the contract, which was 78, I think it finally finished.
Yeah.
With Dean. But up until that point, when you think about it, it wasn't that long. It was less than 20 years.
Yeah.
He was with Reprise, and he didn't do a lot of albums. That's kind of one thing I kind of found, probably going away from your kind of article a little bit, if you don't mind, about Dean's output with Reprise. That you look at Frank, and he literally just did an album every time he kind of got up in the morning. And with Dean, we know he was a whole different kettle of fish, a whole different performer. And even though he loved singing, that was his dream when he was a boy, he kind of stepped back from the recording studio a lot when he signed with Reprise, and his album output kind of slowed almost to literally to a standstill. The last time he recorded was 74, and the album came out in 78 with Once in a While. So you kind of think, I suppose I was kind of disappointed, really, kind of looking back now, that Dean didn't do more for Reprise or with Reprise.
Right.
And I think he took advantage of that control by saying, I don't want to do it.
Right.
But there we go. That was his choice, and what he did do was amazing. And as you said, the type of albums he was doing were so different to Capitol, and I think as a result they kind of elevated kind of what he was doing, and he was able to kind of still be contemporary. The music industry was changing even in the 60s. You had kind of the rock and roll coming into the 50s. You had the Beatles, and you had kind of all the kind of the Bobby Soxer kind of music that was coming in, and I suppose if people like Frank and Dean had stayed with the Capitol sound, they probably wouldn't have survived in the industry.
Not at least in the recording industry. Thinking about at least his output with Reprise, what's interesting too is you look at Frank's career and Dean's career side by side. Frank wasn't doing, I don't want to say he wasn't doing as much as Dean, because he, I'm sure, was very busy and doing a lot of different projects. But you think about Dean's career in the 60s, he had the Dean Martin show.
Yeah.
And then he was in a lot of films.
Yeah.
So
sometimes 3 or 4 a year. Yeah.
Right. So you have to think about it in a way that he might not have. And then, of course, he was still performing in Vegas and doing nightclub shows and, everything else, and maybe touring a little bit here and there. But he might not have had as much time to get into the recording studio. And he had a very particular style of music where he really did want to sing a lot of country music.
Yeah.
And I think he maybe didn't feel as much of a pull as Frank did to sing like the Great American Songbook, which he kind of just he played off of that quite a bit in comparison to Dean.
Yeah.
But I think they would have survived just in a different way. I mean, Sinatra won an Oscar for From Here to Eternity, which I didn't even know until I was reading up on it. But I think they might have just survived in a different way, either with film or television, or maybe they would have kept recording, but maybe just they wouldn't have recorded what they wanted to. And as a musician in that position, that's your dream, is to record what you want to record and, give that to your audience.
In your kind of research, did you kind of, I don't know much about Sinatra's live work. Do you know if he did a lot of live stuff as much as Dean did? Because Dean was always in Vegas, always at the Sands, always at the Grand, the Mega, as he called it. And I think you kind of probably hit the nail on the head there, where Dean's love was cabaret.
Yes.
And recording was a secondary kind of almost support for him.
Yeah.
Support career. And I kind of think that Frank was the other way around, where he was the recording artist.
Yes.
Who then happened to do live shows.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure, because I think Dean had a more natural ease performing. He wasn't as worried about, when you read about how Frank was before a performance, he was warming up, he was getting ready, he had to mentally be prepared to go out there and perform with people. He didn't have stage fright, but at least from what I've read, but he was a performance wasn't easy. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of preparation. With Dean, he did prepare, but he just approached it in a different way that made it easier to do things like that in comparison to Frank, where I think Frank enjoyed more of the regimented, I'm going to go into the studio, I'm going to record this music, and it's going to be beautiful, and it's about his craft. Dean was more about, like you said, that cabaret, kind of interacting with the audience and just having a good time with it, no matter what happens.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to talk more about Dean's live work in the next podcast, but it's kind of interesting kind of comparison that we kind of make there. And I think why Dean didn't record as much with Reprise for that reason alone. He was more comfortable on stage. But you're kind of looking at the legacy that Sinatra kind of gave other artists, and you certainly alluded to that with your reference to Michael Bublé in your article. Do you think, it's probably kind of a loaded question really, but if he hadn't done it, who would have done it? You know, who else had the clout in that time to say no to Capitol or no to somebody else and do their own thing? Was there anybody else that could have possibly had that power behind them?
I think a lot of the artists at Capitol could. I just think that they might have just been happy where they were. Like I know like artists like Gordon McRae, for example, who was with Capitol. He didn't leave. And he said no. And someone had asked him, why aren't you leaving Capitol? This was kind of right when Frank had left. And I think it was pretty big news at the time. And he had said, no, Capitol's been good to me and I've been good to them. And I've been able to record what I want to record. And he recorded mostly like operetta music. That was kind of his niche. And they allowed him to do that. So I think it just depended on artists. But I think a lot of them under Capitol, like Frank or Dean or Nat King Cole or Danny Kaye, I think they all could have, if they had the urge to do it, I think they could have. I think he was just the one that said, you know what, I'm going to do this, because he genuinely was not happy being there.
And his legacy he's left behind, he paved the way for people, like you said earlier about, you mentioned Taylor Swift and her kind of battle with her record label. And I suppose that it's, to my mind, if you're an artist, whether you're a writer or a singer or an actor or a painter, if you aren't able to express your art, I suppose, then you do find that suffocating. And I think one thing I kind of want to think about is kind of what we do with Just Dino, and kind of know that kind of you kind of get a lot from it, and Cindy and Thomas do as well, that we have a kind of the ability to talk about Dean and what he means to us, and I suppose the creativity that we kind of put into it reflects our love for him. And I suppose in a that's a kind of a small way is kind of what kind of Frank and Dean and Sammy and Bing were kind of wanting to do, and they had the ability and the money and the power to say no to somebody and yes to somebody else, and the person they said yes to was Frank. And you know, even though that Frank did sell Reprise to Warner's have kept that going. I think they've kept the freedom going for artists, and I think that will be one of Frank's biggest industry legacies. Right. If that's right, if you agree with me, I don't know.
No, definitely, yeah. No, it definitely is, and I think that's what he would have. I think that was his goal, was looking not only for him and artists at the time, but for the future, because I'm sure he had the foresight, as a lot of them did, to see, okay, this isn't good. Just like how studio systems have kind of, gone to the wayside, he probably is also, at the time, he had seen, okay, we're kind of being put in boxes here, and I want to start a new format for future artists who maybe don't fit into that box with that recording artist.
Yeah. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Just Dino Hour. Thank you for joining us. We hope you did enjoy the show. Please like and subscribe, and of course share. We are very grateful for your support. The links are in the description below. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Click on our logo to subscribe to the Dean Martin Association's official YouTube channel. Please also visit deanmartinassociation.com. Why not also subscribe to our podcast on Spotify? Search the Dean Martin Association podcast.